Hey guys, I'm Rachel O'Leary. Today we're taking a bit of a field trip and a bit of a departure. We're here with my friend Parola, who I've known for about 6 years. I first met him at the Capital Cichlid Association's American Cichlid Association convention down here in DC, where we are today. And this video is going to be a little bit different from a lot of the ones I normally do, though I'm sure you guys heard me talk a lot about some of the topics we're going to be discussing. And today we're going to be talking about some of the legislature buzzwords and different things that hobbyists can do to be responsible consumers, as well as protect our species.
Yeah, great. So as the one and only Rachel O'Leary just said, I'm Art Parola. I'm working in DC this summer, working on legislative issues in the aquarium trade and hobby. And we've got a whole bunch of stuff that we want to tell you guys about, make you guys aware so you can be more educated on the legislative issues impacting your hobby.
So I think a lot of people feel very far removed from all the legislature, but there's actually a lot of different things that we can do as consumers to make sure that we're making educated decisions, as well as choosing livestock that are appropriate. Can you tell us a little bit about Habitatitude? Habitatitude?
Yeah, Habitatitude. So Habitatitude is a really cool initiative with the Pet Industry Joint Advisory Council, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA, and several other government agencies to help educate consumers about invasive species. Now, invasive species are a species that is not native to the region, that is introduced, that disrupts a habitat in an ecosystem.
I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen news reports on that, people going fishing and finding a fish that really doesn't belong. And it's often thought that a lot of this boils down to us, the hobbyists, so it's important to always make sure that if you no longer want one of your pets, you don't just release it into the wild no matter what it is.
Yeah, definitely. Invasive species are a really big issue. As aquarists, we all want to be conservationists. That's part of the aquarium hobby, is participating in conservation and conservation initiatives. And releasing invasive species into the wild goes against that. So never dump your aquarium fish into a wild habitat. More than likely they're going to die anyway, but if they don't, they could cause a lot of issues in an ecosystem. So it's very important. If you want to learn more, you can go to www.habitatitude.net.
I'll put that link below as well.
The link in the description. It's a really great resource for aquarists and aquarists, aquatic plant keepers, reptile keepers on educating on invasive species and the issues they can cause. And as aquarists, we want healthy habitats, both in our own backyards and in exotic places where many of our tropical fish come from. So please be a responsible aquarist.
So on the note of where our species come from, this is one of my sort of pet interests. Ethical collection and wild collection is always a hot topic among the consumer as well as the people who provide the fish. And I know that there's quite a few resources out there to allow people to know who is ethically collecting, what does that mean, and sort of the impact it not only has on us as consumers, but also in the areas where fish are being collected. A lot of people don't realize that the tropical fish industry is exceptionally important to the livelihoods of a lot of people.
Definitely, definitely. So the great thing about being a consumer in this industry is most importers and distributors are very careful about who they source from and where the fish they distribute to your local pet store come from. So most of the homework is already done on that case. Of course, you can always do more research. There's plenty of information out there, and be choosy about what fish you plan to keep. It's really interesting. For a long time, people thought captive bred was the answer to everything, that captive breeding would solve all the environmental problems. And to some degree, that's true. A healthy fish hobby will have both captive bred and wild collected fish.
Unfortunately for people like me, that means the vast majority of what I'm interested in keeping would just not be available. And one other thing to think about is a lot of times when industry is shifted from collection to something else, it can also further gold mining and other destructive environmental
things. There's a lot of environmental.
People need to make a living.
Tropical areas, especially the Amazon rainforest, reefs in the South Pacific, these areas, the collection of tropical fish is sustainable, and it provides an income to people who would otherwise be involved in destructive environmental practices, clear-cut logging, mining, other things like that. Tropical fish provide a sustainable, because they breed every year, income for these people living in these areas. One really cool initiative done by the pet industry is Project PIJAC. Project PIJAC is in Manaus, down in Brazil, and it is sustainably collected tropical fish that is a model for the sustainable collection and harvest of these fish. Most of these fish, it's really interesting, would actually die. So they're collected in these pools, which would dry up once at the end of the rainy season, at the end of the dry season rather. When everything is completely dry, they get stuck in these pools and they're collected. And they generate a lot of income that wouldn't otherwise be there. So when you buy a fish, you're saving a tree, and that's their motto.
Well, and I think they do direct donations as well,
yes,
to preservation, conservation, and ethical collection.
So the New England Aquarium and the pet industry are the big supporters of this initiative. Another thing, real cool thing, you can go on PIJAC eco tours. They do eco tours as well. The New England Aquarium heads that up, and you can go and see where these fish are collected and everything like that.
You briefly mentioned reefs, and I know that one of the big projects with PIJAC and legislature right now is preserving what's going on in Hawaii. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Now guys, we're going to take a brief departure into saltwater, but I promise you it's relevant to us freshies as well for a few reasons.
Definitely. So the reef keepers will all be very well aware of this issue. The freshwater enthusiasts, maybe not so much. But in the state of Hawaii, they have what biologists call the best managed nearshore fishery in the world. One of the best managed nearshore fisheries in the entire world is right in the United States, in the state of Hawaii. There are some people who are against keeping animals in captivity at all. Whether that, captivity is keeping a Victorian cichlid that is extinct in the wild, or a godiad from Mexico that no longer has a habitat, they are against it. And so they make emotional appeals that the collection is unethical and these other things. Unfortunately, what that does is it creates an opportunity to shut down the best managed, or one of the best managed, nearshore fisheries in the world.
It sets a precedent for future...
Really big precedent. So all the things we've been talking about with the great work that fishermen in all these countries do, and how it's sustainable, if we shut down one of the best managed fisheries, that could have an effect that once you shut that down, you can shut anything down,
and
including
it'll trickle down through our freshwater hobby.
Exactly. Other sustainable fisheries would be shut down. So back to the hobby, people used to think that wild collection was bad. Wild collection is always bad. You're taking an organism out of its environment. And in some cases that's true with endangered species that are threatened with extinction. You definitely don't want to go into these populations and remove breeding animals that would sustain the population.
There's a lot of back and forth on feelings about that.
Yeah,
some folks feel like if they get them and can preserve them, then they're doing a service. Some people feel like they should be left there.
There is definitely an argument for that. However, in most cases, this really isn't the case with wild collection. The pet industry works very hard, the distributors, because if there's no fish in the wild, I mean, what does that really do for us? So what we do is, captive breeding is a great thing. Wild collection also has its place. A mix is best. You want to collect at a sustainable level, and if you're collecting too many fish, you can't do that. So supplementing captive bred fish with wild collected fish is very important.
It's also important to be able to reintroduce wild genetics into captive strains in order to maintain the quality and longevity of a lot of the farmed species. So there's more at play here than just, us snatching fish out of the wild.
Yes, definitely. So really important conservation intergovernmental treaty is CITES. It's the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species. And here in DC, I've worked on several issues with important players in this treaty. Right now, stingrays, for a time there was an issue with permits. And so one of the things we worked on up here was ensuring that the trade in stingrays is sustainable and ensuring that the proper permits are issued to exporting countries before they're shipped into the U.S. The trade is committed to ensuring that any species we're dealing in, especially wild collected, are done ethically, responsibly, and that those fish will always be in the wild. So with the stingrays, we work very hard to make sure that the proper permits are issued when we bring them into the U.S. and that we can track. But one of the things with the CITES 3D permits is it's made to track the species so we know exactly what's going in, what's coming out, and we have a log and we can tell and make sure that the trade is sustainable.
And some of these are going to places like public aquariums, yes, where they'll actively be bred to continue the population, yeah, growth. So there's a lot of really important things that go alongside with this other than just our interest as fish keepers.
And stingrays are an interest, the freshwater stingrays are a real interesting case study because they are captive bred and they're wild collected. It's a good example of the hobby working to ensure that it is following through with its commitment to conservation.
Exactly. So what sort of things can we expect in the future? I know one of the hot sort of topics right now is the controversy between whitelist and blacklist. And whitelist is basically a list of species we're allowed to have. A blacklist is a list of species that we're not allowed to have because of their invasive status. And currently, right now, I believe in Maine and Michigan, yeah, they are acting on an active whitelist. This means the only species we're allowed to keep are ones that are on this list, no others. And this, to me, is a very dangerous idea. So I know one of the things that PIJAC and the legislators, as well as ART, are working on down here is sort of fighting the concepts behind that and clearing up what these things mean to us, the consumers, as well as the general public.
Yeah, definitely. As a state issue, this is normally an issue with states, not necessarily the federal government. Some states want to go with a whitelist, and what that is it's the general idea is you want to prevent invasive species. I know we've talked a bunch about invasive species, and it's very important to prevent invasive species. Invasive species wreak havoc in the local habitats. But the way they want to do that is, the way most of them do it now is through a blacklist. And the blacklist says these species could cause an issue if they got out into our environment. Do not keep these species in the state.
They cannot be brought into.
And that's a very good thing. That's a very important thing. We should not have species which are a risk to the local wildlife and local ecosystem.
And you guys have heard me talk about this quite a lot.
Committed to that, and the hobbyists are too. So. Whitelists, however, those say this is a list of species, and these species are what you can have, and you can't have anything else. That means a lot of fish, which pose zero risk at all to your local ecosystem, are not allowed to be
And it's
kept.
a lot of fish we're already keeping and have been keeping. It also puts a halt to things like working with the CARES program.
Yes.
You know, and to me, that is a really big problem.
Usually not many people keep them. The people who keep them, though, are very important in keeping those species going. They may be critically endangered in the wild, or they may be completely extinct in the wild. So having those species in aquariums is incredibly important. Good example is in West Virginia, a couple years back, wanted to list neon tetras as a potential invasive species.
Can you imagine?
So neon tetras obviously are not going to cause any issues in West Virginia. They cannot survive the cold. They probably would get eaten immediately.
And they don't pose any risk to the other flora or microorganisms really that thrive in that environment.
So listing species like that on a blacklist or having species like that not on a whitelist creates a real problem. And people like me, like PIJAC, several lawyers and lobbyists in DC and around the country are working to ensure that that doesn't happen.
Now, one of the questions I have is, you know, for instance, we have this whitelist occurring in Maine and Michigan right now. How difficult is it to get species added to that whitelist when they've been excluded, and how does one go about doing that?
At most times, next to impossible. It's very expensive. It costs a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of back and forth with regulators and legislators. Getting species which would cause no threat to the ecosystems onto a whitelist, a lot of times is next to impossible. And we've had that happen several times. People have petitioned for species which there was no reason to exclude from the list to be added to the unrestricted whitelist. They were not put on the list. The state said, no, we don't want to put this species on the list. So
you guys keep hearing us mention PIJAC, 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 and this is an organization that Art works very closely
Yes.
with, and I've had meetings with them as well. And basically, it's the Pet Industry Joint Advisory Committee, I believe.
Joint Advisory Council.
Council, I was so close. So they are a conglomerate that works, you know, for our best interests as consumers and pet keepers, and they have what's called the Aquatics Fund,
Yes.
which funds their efforts, and it's something that you can donate to, or you can get your store involved with.
Yes.
Do they have an Amazon Smile program? Is there anything like that?
I don't think there's anything like that, but you can go to the Aquatics Fund, you can sign up for their email updates, you can donate. If every aquarist, and there's several million aquarists in the US, if every aquarist just gave $1 to the Aquatics Fund, it would go a really long way to ensuring that we could have an ethical, responsible, and sustainable aquarium hobby in the US at all times.
I have donated and I plan to do it again, and I will make sure I put a link to that below. You know, you see all the time, you know, people saying in lieu of gifts do this. This would be a great one for that.
Definitely. And if you have a business, supporting this is really important, because there are definitely interests that would like to see your business put out of business.
Well, it is super, super hot here.
It is
in front of the Capitol, and I feel bad for my buddy Art here in his suit. So, I'd like to thank you guys for watching. Thank you for joining me.
Appreciate all the support the hobby gives us.
Make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss any other videos. I'll be doing a few things with Art, and I'd like to do some follow-ups with these concepts in the future.
Definitely, and I will continue fighting for your right to keep aquarium fish.